Welcome to Live with Crabtree Coaching Collaborative, your compass for educational excellence. Now, as instructional leaders, we want to avoid that overwhelming sense of burnout and exhaustion because of all of those different competing priorities. We want to avoid our staff members becoming utterly frustrated because they cannot keep up with the demands. And let's face it, we want to avoid just having that lack of confidence because we don't feel like we're making any progress. That's why you're here, right? My name is Alissa Crabtree, and with over 16 years of experience, I am here to help you gain clarity, amplify your learning like never before, and hone in on intentionality. This is where transformation begins, and excellence is always the standard. Remember, we are in this together, my friends, so let's do this thing. Good evening, everyone. I hope you are having a fabulous day. I am here with the one and only Jana Lee of Jana Lee Consulting. Jana, how you doing, girl?
I'm doing really well. I'm so excited to be here.
I am too. I've had you on the show before, and first let me tell you, every time that we talk, I feel like I am renewed and I get super pumped because I'm like, oh, we can solve the problems of the world.
You couldn't be more on with that statement. I feel very similarly like, okay, we're going to conquer all of education's problems together.
Exactly. And tonight we're talking about a big problem.
Yeah, we are.
And I think we might step on some people's toes. We might make some people angry. Heck, we might even make some people really excited. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit about why we're here. Do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think you and I have had a lot of conversations about not just what we see going on in the PLC work within schools and districts, but and I know that you bring that expertise of like bringing the clarity and the cohesion and the alignment to PLCs, and my expertise in the data-driven instruction. I feel like whenever we speak, it always comes down to teachers are not collecting the right data in their classrooms, and it's impacting the work that PLCs are able to achieve when it comes to closing learning gaps. And, that's why we're here. We want to talk about how can we bring clarity to PLCs in regards to data-driven instruction so that teachers can be more confident in their data work and students thrive.
Exactly, Jana. And before we get into the right kind of data that needs to be collected, I want to address leadership right now. And I'm not talking about principals. I'm talking about district leadership and the root cause as to why teachers aren't collecting the right data. And I just want to give pause here for a moment and talk about over testing and the emphasis on interim assessments, benchmark assessments, NWEA, like all of these purchased assessments that, not to say are horrible, but when you do all of them, it is taking away true instructional time that is valuable. I was at my daughter's dance rehearsal the other night, and one of the moms was talking about they're already doing STAR interim assessment. STAR is Texas's state assessment, and they have 3 next week. And during that time, they do a full campus shutdown. So there will be no instruction at all that day in any of their classes. That's 3 instructional days. And then you have their campus summative assessment. It's just assess. So what would you say? Let's talk about that for a little bit and unpack it. Why are we over testing and what can we do about it?
I think, there's when we look at these systems of testing, there's systems that are implemented by default, just traditionally what is already there, systems by default. So testing by default, what do we traditionally use for our testing, which are those big performance exams and those benchmarks. And then you look at systems by design. So when we think of testing by design, I don't know, or even when we think about data analysis by design, I should say, I don't know that the immediate thought is to look at the smaller pieces of data that are being collected in the classroom, because such emphasis is consistently placed on those larger assessments in districts. Because it speaks comprehensively to how students are performing in the classroom. And that data, that overarching data, is also the most accessible to the leaders at district level. So when they want to see how are my students performing across the board, it's very easy to look at those bigger data and benchmark assessments. But where we really move the needle is in the classroom. Easier said than done. I think any leader would let you know, would agree, I should say, that we move the needle in the classroom. If that is the case, then let's pull back on the emphasis and the time spent of shutting down school, instruction and having students go into these testing days, and instead put our core focus in the data collection that happens in the classroom and properly training our teachers for data collection, data analysis, sorting, and doing something with that data within lessons.
Yeah, well, and Jana, I don't know if you see this or not. Well, I know you see this. We talk about this all the time. Is when we are on campuses and even in our own personal experience when we were in the classroom, this overemphasis on summative and district assessments, when you sit down with your team and you spend hours analyzing that data, you're also receiving the message that you have to keep moving. So by that time, it's too late. You have to keep on going. And then we have students who need tier 3 instruction. Whereas if we collected the right data instead of focusing and overanalyzing summative data, oh my gosh, we truly could move the needle. And I even, there's a lot of problems. One, I look at so much instructional time is spent preparing for big summative assessments and just strategies to take a test.
Right.
To me, anyways, that's a whole nother show.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the right data. What should district leaders and campus leaders understand about the right data?
So I think that right data, there's not a singular definition for it because it's so dependent on who it's for and what it's for. So I think of assessment tiers. We have sort of these different assessment tiers, and sort of the overarching assessment falls on those district assessments, such as your bigger state performance exams, okay, or district level exams. And that's sort of at the top here. Then we get into, as we narrow, if I think of an inverted triangle, okay, as we narrow that triangle, we get into school summative assessments. So those summative assessments are geared towards speaking about how a school comprehensively is doing. So that might be a school-wide performance, school-wide benchmarks, kind of like what you were talking about your daughter, having the school summative. That's where that falls. And that gives the principal and assistant principal and other instructional leaders in the school an understanding of where the school is comprehensively across the board in their math and literacy. Then finally, we get into the classroom, and we have classroom summatives. Okay. Those classroom summatives fall more into midterms, finals. I would even, I hesitate to say unit exams, but perhaps it, I think it's kind of it's not an exact science. So that's kind of fluid in between summative and formative, but those summative classroom, and that gives the teacher an understanding of where students in that class fall on a group of standards or skills or content. Okay. Then we get to formative assessment. Okay. Formative assessment are your quizzes, your exit tickets, maybe your general observations, your anecdotals, right? Your thumbs up, your thumbs down, which I have my own issues with. Green cup, red cup, formative, comes in all different shapes and sizes. That gives information to teachers, right? Undoubtedly. And it's data. All of this is data. But what it doesn't allow teachers to do traditionally, because of the way we think about formative assessment, because of the way teachers are trained in formative assessment practices, it doesn't allow teachers to sustainably and continuously remediate within the lesson, so that as soon as interruption is recognized, the next steps to minimize that interruption and close the learning gap happens. So what do we need? We need at the pinnacle the check for understanding. And the
Yes.
check for understanding is right data. That is where learning gaps close immediately, because the teacher has identified a specific point in time within the lesson where independently students will showcase their understanding of a skill, an objective, content. Think of it this way. I was with a pair of teachers today. They're math teachers. Yesterday, I was in their classrooms, kind of getting to know more about their teaching styles, getting to know more about their, their goals in their classroom, their students, just classroom environment. And this individual teacher was teaching a math lesson and had had a set of problems and was reviewing. Gave students an opportunity to work independently on problems 1 through 3. Okay. So today we talked about utilizing, instead of having students work through problems 1 through 3 independently and then reviewing, what we do is we check for understanding with problem 1. So problem 1, students are working independently in their seats on problem 1, and they've got 2 minutes to do it. What's happening? What is the teacher doing while students are working? The teacher is circulating the room and documenting very quickly on a tracker who got it and who didn't. Because anyone who didn't do number 1 probably is not going to be able to get to number 2 or number 3 correctly. So what do? That teacher will pull into a small group the ones who didn't get number 1 right, quickly remediate, close that learning gap, and send them back out to complete number 2 and 3. I call it catch and release. I catch you when you don't get it, and then I release you back out into the wild.
Yeah.
And then if I see that you can't do number 2 correctly, I'm going to catch you back. We're going to go through number 2. I'm going to close the learning gap even further, and I'm going to release you back out. That is right data. And that doesn't happen enough. And I know it doesn't happen enough because districts and schools come to me saying, how do we close these learning gaps? Well, we're not focusing on the classroom level. We're too focused on what these larger summative exams are saying.
100%, Jana. And I'm going to take it back. I like some sports analogies here.
Yes.
And it goes back to that immediate feedback. As teachers, we are coaches for our students. And if I am coaching a basketball game, there's no way that I'm going to let a player continue to make mistakes on the court, but then tell them at the end of the game. Like, I'm going to be yelling across the court, or I'm going to bring them in for a huddle. That's even
right.
more powerful.
You're going to call a timeout.
Exactly, because that is what coaching is. And teachers, we're coaches. We are all coaches. And I'm going to tell you, secondary, don't shut down when you hear that word small group. I have been training English 4 teachers on how to pull small group. And there's various ways to do it because that catch and release is pivotal.
Let me tell you, Alissa, the small group, I think traditionally and historically, we see small groups as a almost tier 2, tier 3 remediation uh, uh, system, right? Where it's for right. It's for traditionally small groups. I think teachers are used to it being elongated. It's a time where we have to have real dedicated instruction and it's separate from what's going on in the rest. And that's just not true. Small group can happen as a remediation or targeted instruction strategy within tier 1.
Yes.
And there's not enough of that. And I hear a lot. I hear a lot of I'm hearing a lot on the streets about leaders sharing their frustration with tier 1 not being enough for students. And there's an increase in referrals from teachers for tier 2 and tier 3. And the reality is that we haven't closed the gaps within tier 1 the way we should to then be able to systematically make the recommendations for tier 2 and tier 3.
Well, and it goes back to we are providing feedback after the game has been lost.
That's right.
And instead, we need to be giving it in the moment because we're coaches and it's not, like you said, it's not tier 2 and tier 3. And you don't have to pull kids up to a kidney table if you don't, like it can come in many forms and fashion, but it's feedback and we need to be providing it. But that means our teachers need the opportunity and the tools to prepare for that, to track that, and to analyze that, not so much analyze the final game.
That's right. And what you're seeing right now is the PLC time being dedicated to teachers having to take all of these notes and take the observations and the anecdotals and sort of like organize it and then put it into a protocol and then have the protocol, tell them what they should be doing. And there's a lot of time wasted because we're not maximizing or building efficient data systems in the lessons or in the classrooms so that PLC time can actually be more of all right, let's enter it into the protocol, but we're going to spend the majority of our time here discussing next steps. And that also is the second big thing I'm hearing in the streets are just leaders feel like once these PLC meetings are over, the next steps are not carried out.
Yeah.
They're not happening if they're even getting there. So the protocol, the chunk of the time is spent on like organizing and analyzing, when if you had a system that was efficient and spent the time in the lesson, or I should say spent the time with teachers to get them to build those efficient systems in the lesson, then PLC time could be more about having those conversations of next steps. And let me say, you could also preemptively decide what will be challenges or barriers to us being able to implement these next steps. So you even take it a step further in the PLC because you're not spending as much time analyzing and sorting all this data.
Yeah. And I mean, I have watched professional learning communities come together and spend hours filling out forms on summative data, looking at various subpobs, like going through and like fine tooth comb, going through that summative data. And in my mind, I see them, I watch them create these beautiful, smart goals, but then nothing ever happens with them. And in my mind, I'm sitting here thinking, man, if you put that time into focusing on common formative assessments, that's where the magic happens.
Alissa, I had a teacher today who I worked with last semester and I saw her today and she was so excited. She came up to me, she showed me this tracker and it was like the most basic. We spent a lot of time working with this team on being able to efficiently check for understanding, remediate in the moment, and track it so that she could know where students stood in their growth for certain standards and skills. And to see how she set up this very basic tracker for herself. And she was able to write in the math skill that they were working on. And she was able to document who got it, who almost got it, who's not yet getting it. And she said to me, she says, Jana, I know where my students are at with this skill, because look, I could tell you literally where, Sue and Joe and Mary are in their understanding of equations, linear equations. So now she's showing up to her PLC meeting, and she's showing up to the IEP meetings, being able to speak data-driven language, which I don't know is so intuitive or organic for teachers to do, because they're not necessarily taught how. And that's not because of leaders, it's not that's not leadership fault. That's just the way our system is built and what happens in pre-service training and all of that.
Yeah. Well, and it also goes into an overemphasis of the summatives.
Right.
When, if professional learning communities determine the right data that they're going to bring in on a weekly basis, however, whatever the frequency is, imagine the power of sitting down with your high, medium, and lows. Got it, almost got it, doesn't got it. Like, looking at it that way and reflecting on the instructional strategies that worked and didn't work. And that is where the power is. And I'm even going to side note here, that's also building relationships with your students. And we talk about the importance of building relationships with our kiddos. It's not always lovey-dovey, what's going on. It's also understanding, because if I have kids in my room and I see that maybe they are not responding to this, I could then dig deeper into culture, into race, into beliefs. And then I am getting to know the individual in front of me. That's fostering relationships.
I was just having a conversation with Chip Baker.
Yes, I've had him on the show.
Let's go. I say that for sure. So we were actually talking just about this. And, I shared with him that when I was a former special education teacher in a very high need school district, South Bronx of New York City. And these are students who were, some were living in homeless shelters. Some were taking care of their sick siblings, had, single parent households. Some were, showing up and had not eaten dinner the night before. Okay. And data was the way that I kept the bar high. And I kept, that buzzword rigor. I actually lived that in my room, because I would not allow my students' circumstances to dictate how I treated them or what I believed they could do. I let the data speak to that. So when students come in and show me in the CFU, the check for understanding, that they didn't understand this standard or this standard, I could help them know that I was closing that gap and keep the expectations high, because I was going to send them back out and knew I'd given them what they needed to be successful. That is how I developed a relationship with students that was grounded in the belief that they could. And if they couldn't, I was going to help them. And it wasn't going to be because I didn't think they could do it on their own. It was going to be based on a concrete piece of information.
Well, and guess what, Jana? Right then, that student received a small win, because you made one tiny adjustment based on your feedback. So they had a win, a victory, which motivates students. And I look at it the same way as teachers. When we coach teachers, we need high expectations. We don't lower the bar. We raise the bar. But a teacher is going to feel defeated and beat down if the feedback we give them is negative, 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 negative. And that's what a lot of our students see when they receive summative assessment results. But if we are giving them one tiny adjustment in the moment and they experience an immediate win, they will be motivated to keep moving forward.
This also impacts teacher confidence and teacher wins.
Yes.
I'll share one more anecdote. I have another set of teachers. They're elementary school teachers. They've started tracking and implementing micro data, right data. I call it micro data because it's the tiny granular data that we're collecting. but started implementing this in their rooms, and they were tracking, and they said to me, Jana, this has brought more confidence to my teaching. Not only are they seeing an increase in student scores and student growth, but they know that they are giving their students what they need to close the gap. So no longer are they feeling like they're hamsters on a wheel using summative or even formative assessments to try to make up instruction. Or I'm sure you've seen this before. They, it's like, okay, let me teach a Monday through Thursday, let me teach new material. And then Friday will be the day that I help everybody who didn't understand the material Monday through Thursday. They said, we don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Because we're doing it throughout the week. So there's less pressure to have to make up those gaps or give the summative and then figure out where am I going to find the time in my unit or in my lessons to help the students who didn't do so well. It's happening in the moment. The teacher actually described it as it's like planned remediation versus instant remediation. The planned remediation happens less frequently because they're instantly remediating based on the data. Planned remediation comes from summatives. Instant remediation comes from micro check for understandings.
I am drawing a blank. Oh, Susan Ann Tomlinson?
Carol Ann Tomlinson.
Carol Ann Tomlinson.
Yeah.
I remember her visiting my school district, and she was talking about, remediation in the moment, like, in the moment. But really, and everything that you're saying just reminded me of that, of what her message was. And we need to plan it, and we need to be prepared the best that we can. And so I know, I have conversations with teachers actually just this last weekend, and I was talking to teachers and we were discussing time, and they're like, yes, Alissa, this all sounds great, but when do I have the time to do this? And that is where the power of your professional learning community comes into play. And when we streamline the process of defining teacher clarity and looking at, hey, this is where we're going to have a check for understanding. This is important enough that we want to have a check for understanding. And then you depend on one another to create little remediation strategies, little coaching moves, I want to say.
Yeah.
We have to depend on our PLC. I think that's powerful.
And I think a first good step, and maybe before leaders decide that this initiative, or let me take that back. When leaders decide that they want to emphasize a change or a shift in how PLCs utilize data, before going ahead and searching for different protocols to use, because I know that that's something that constantly pops up, before trying to figure out, well, what's the data that we're going to use in the PLCs, before, even expecting your teachers to be able to develop or have a data deep dive or have data-driven conversations, pull it back. And first step, see where they're at with their own data proficiency. That will tell you where to begin. That will tell you what protocol to use, what types of data they feel comfortable using, what types of data they don't feel comfortable using. Get to the heart of where they feel their comfort lies in data, so that you as a leader can formulate your next move very strategically and in alignment with what they need.
Yep. I mean, heck, show them this episode.
Yep.
Have them watch this episode and elicit questions and reflections. And then, like you said, look at we have to assess the collective efficacy among the team. And what does that look like?
I actually have a tool that leaders can use and bring to their PLCs. It's my PLC Insight Survey. And this is a tool that principals, instructional coaches, supervisors have used with their teams at any point in time, just to gauge where PLC members feel that they are at in their data proficiency. So when there's questions around, why are we not seeing these gaps being closed? What's happening in these meetings, right? Like, where are we going off? Where's the misalignment? I know that we're deep and heading really thick into testing season. That's going to be here before we know it, right? Those state exams. And slight moves can be made if you know where your PLC stands. So if you head to, thanks for throwing that there. If you head to that link, I also have it's a downloadable and editable survey. It's a one pager that is accompanied by a video that will explain to you how to administer it, because we don't want to just throw this at them and say, fill it out. Walks you through how to, that would be the antithesis of what we're doing, but walks you through how to present the survey, how to collect results, and what to do with those results so that you can be as effective in your PLC moves and kind of take the cues of what your teachers feel they need to move forward.
100%.
In the right.
And one thing, Jana, I've seen this resource. I've gone through it. This is a powerful tool for any administrator, instructional coach, instructional leadership team to sit down and find a place to start. Because remember, we can't just eat the elephant all at once. It needs to be one bite at a time. And this is a very clear and strategic starting point. And I've dropped it in the chat as well as put it here. And I'm going to add it to the show notes. People, this is a great tool. I want you to get your hands on it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alissa.
Thank you, Jana. Hey, and you know what? We're going to have you on again. We're going to continue this conversation about data.
The work is never done.
It's never done.
Yeah, we could talk about this for hours. I love it, though. This is just
I do too.
time.
It's my favorite. And you know what? Teachers, educators, principals, superintendent, whether you're watching this live or you are watching the replay, submit your questions. Jana and I are here to answer them. And you know what? If we need to, we'll come back on here and we'll have you as a guest as well.
Woo,
so
I love it.
Ask those questions and we're going to knock them out of the park. All right, everyone. Thank you, Jana, so much for coming and joining us. And until next time, everyone, hope you enjoyed the show.
Bye.